Welcome to Lecompton, Kansas. This was the territorial capital of Kansas. And so what does that mean? Well, before Kansas was a state in 1861, there was the Kansas Territory, covered a very large region. It was much bigger than the state of Kansas is today. And this little town of a few hundred people today was the capital of the entire territory. It's got a pretty fascinating history. There's also some pretty cool stuff to see in town. Let's get started with listening to one of the experts, though. Let's head over to the Historical Museum, and we're going to meet Paul, and Paul is going to educate us a little bit about the history of this fascinating town. Looking good.
Well,
It was called Bald Eagle. And so how did people come here? Why did the community start?
it was a natural place to make a settlement because the Oregon Trail is just 2 miles south, and the Kansas River was available for boat traffic. And so they started building houses or some community. And when the Kansas Territorial Legislature decided that they didn't want to be right on the Missouri line for the capital, they decided that Lecompton would be the best fit for the territorial capital. And Lecompton is the only official territorial capital, and it was from 1855 to 1861.
And obviously, when people think of Kansas, they think of the state, but obviously it was a much larger area than just the state of Kansas in that time.
When it was a territory, Kansas went to the Continental Divide. I represent Governor Denver, and he was one of the 9 territorial governors that was here in Lecompton during that short term. And he wanted to locate a city at the foot of the Rockies, so he sent a group out from Lecompton to locate the city. They platted it and named it after the governor. Kansas gave it up because it was such an expanse between eastern Kansas and the foot of the Rockies. They thought it'd be too hard to govern, and they didn't want to be involved with mineral rights. But if you want to know how big Kansas could be, there is another fact, and it's verified by the Lincoln newspapers, that during the territorial period, the people south of the Platte River came down and asked the Kansas Territorial Legislature to take that portion of Nebraska into the state of Kansas. But the Kansas Territorial Legislature refused because they said there was too many Douglas Democrats in southern Nebraska.
How was it different than like it being a state? What was the difference in it, Kansas being governed as territory compared to a state? There's obviously other states that were out east and they were moving west. Was there a difference or was it very similar?
Well, they were writing a constitution, which Kansas had 4 constitutions: the Leavenworth, the Topeka, the Lecompton, and the Wyandotte, which is the one that they finally approved. The Topeka Constitution was rejected because it was a free state constitution, but it advocated not having a black man slavery-free living here. The Lecompton Constitution was rejected because it was pretty much a pattern after the Missouri Constitution was pro-slavery.
How was the Lecompton, what happened here in Lecompton and it being the territorial capital and the politics of Lecompton affect the election that helped Abraham Lincoln become the president?
Well, the Lecompton Constitution went back to Washington, D.C. for approval. It was approved in the United States Senate 33 to 25, and President Buchanan strongly endorsed it. The House rejected it 120 to 112. And during the House rejection, they got into a physical fight in the House of Representatives over the Lecompton Constitution. Up to 50 congressmen were fighting. It didn't end until the congressman from Wisconsin pulled the wig off of the congressman from Mississippi, held it up in the air and yelled out, "Look, I've scalped him." But as a result of this fight, it split the National Democratic Party. So in 1860, when Lincoln ran for president, there were 4 candidates. Stephen Douglas is a Northern Democrat, John Breckinridge is a Southern Democrat, John Bell is a conservative Whig, and Lincoln won with only 39% of the vote. So it can very easily be said, without the fight over the Lecompton Constitution in Washington, Lincoln might not have been elected president. Jonathan Earl, who was a history professor, was quoted in a New York Times article, said Lincoln would not be president if it had not been for the Lecompton Constitution. And the historian at the Lincoln Library spoke here in Lecompton, and he says Lecompton was the word, not an A word, for 4 years in Washington. It was a major historical story over this Lecompton Constitution. Well, the actual ballot that was used in 1858 to elect the People's Anti-Democratic Party candidates to Congress, which again is something very few people know about, but there was 8 people elected to Congress under that party's name, 2 people from New Jersey, 3 from New York, 2 from Pennsylvania, and 1 from Indiana. They all, and when they were in Congress, in 1859, there were 2.4% know-nothings and 3.3% anti-Lecompton Democrats. They were pro-slavery, or they were anti-slavery. The Lecompton Democrats that had another party that elected a person in the governor of California were pro-slavery. There's no town in America that has 2 national political parties named after it, but nobody knows about it. And why, I'd like to know.
They're going to know about it now. We're going to get the word out. Then Kansas becomes a state. And what happened to Lecompton when Kansas became a state?
Well, it was a pro-slavery town. It wasn't so much that the people were pro-slavery, that Pierce and Buchanan were pro-slavery leaning presidents, and they wanted Kansas to come in as a slave state to keep the balance of power equal in the Senate. And so they sent out pro-slavery leaning government officials. Most of the people who came here were looking for money because it was going to be the capital. And of course, when the capital was moved, they all left. And so its population dropped from nearly 4,000 down to 700, which it is today. When the Kansas became a state, because Lecompton was pro-slavery, the state entered as a free state, and during that time, it was very bitter. And so sometimes Lecompton is referred to as the lonely widow of the Caw. And if you look around, the free state cities all received something, and Lecompton got nothing. Topeka got the Capitol building, Manhattan got the State University or State College, KU got the State University, Leavenworth got the prison, Osawatomie got the mental institution. So it goes to show you why its population shrank. Well, there's a saying we like to say that I think that Kansas could make a tremendous amount of money off of tourism, because when you look at the South and you look at the East Coast, they are making a lot of money bringing in tourists to their historic sites or Civil War sites. There were over 100 people killed in Kansas prior to the Civil War. So it can very easily be said that Kansas is the birthplace of the Civil War, not South Carolina. Or if you want to go to another statement, is Bleeding Kansas caused the earthquake that shook America. Right here in Lecompton, there was a Battle of Fort Titus 2 miles south of Lecompton in 1856, in which 3 people were killed, 14 people were injured, and Titus left Kansas and founded Titusville, Florida. But there are other occasions like the battle at Mine Creek, where John Brown murdered and butchered 5 pro-slavery people. Then a year later, the pro-slavery people killed 6 people at Meridazine massacre site, and it just goes on and on and on during that time period.
What is Lecompton like today, if you were to describe to someone that's never been here before?
Well, it's a small town, but it's very much has major tourist attractions, because Constitution Hall is a national landmark. Was to be the territorial capital where we're sitting today, but the thing that makes it interesting is that it became Lane University, and in 1884, President Eisenhower's mother's parents died in Virginia. She came to Topeka to live with some families by the name of Stover. He came down in the fall of '84, she came down in the fall of '84, and his parents were married right here in this room where we're sitting.
It was originally started to become
It was really started
Capitol
as the Capitol building, but when they made it Lane University, they filled in the east and west wings, so they only had the center portion. Then it became Lane University, and when the university closed in 1902 because they got into a fight over joining lodges, secret organizations, they then started the high school in this building until 1928, And this room that we're sitting in, they used it to play basketball in, and that is a fact because my mother said she played basketball here. This museum and Constitution Hall are open Wednesdays through Saturdays from 9 to 5 and Sundays from 1 to 5. We have restaurants and stores to visit uptown, and so there's something to do if you come and want to do something different. It's just a wonderful town to visit. It's one of the most historic towns in America that nobody knows about.
Now that we've learned a little bit about the history of Lecompton, Kansas, let's take a little tour around, show you the rest of the town of what it looks like today. Besides the historical museum, the Constitution Hall is basically the other main attraction. As a museum type place, you can see the National Historic Landmark as Paul had talked about, and it's a little bit different than the museum in the fact that it has all these different displays that are, very informative. There's the different populations through Kansas in the early days of the territory, timelines of all the important things that happened in Lecompton, about the history of Lecompton, how it got started, kind of, different things that Paul talked about with me earlier on, the different, crazy things politically that happened, the fraudulent elections, the box that held the ballots. I was told this is the original flooring of Constitution Hall, so it's pretty cool to think about. And then they had different items obviously from the town in the Territorial days. And one thing that was interesting is I didn't know about these early flags. So it's a 34-star flag. I don't know if that's like an official flag that the United States had, but those are pretty interesting. We head upstairs and more displays. They used this Constitution Hall for a variety of things from the time it was used politically until now as a more of a museum type deal. But really terrific information. Talks about all the different places that kind of wanted to be the territorial capital. Lecompton was the official capital, but there were other places that had importance in the territory. There's another interesting design of a flag, and then obviously Abraham Lincoln. Ever since I moved to Kansas in 2006, I've been fascinated with that time of when Kansas was a territory, and before it was a state, and how that worked, because it's definitely unique in the history of our country, and how significant Kansas was to the Civil War, and specifically how significant this town, Lecompton, was to that time. So really glad I was able to visit. I would highly recommend to come. There's shops here, there's places to eat, there's obviously the museums, a lot of great people in Lecompton, Kansas. Definitely come and check it out.
What do you see for the future of Lecompton? If you were to look 20 years ahead, do you think it'll stay this small, historic town, or are there population centers that maybe people would want to come live here, or is the population get smaller in the future?
Well, it's going to grow. We have our own turnpike interchange just west of Lawrence, which certainly helps put us on the map. Lawrence is growing west. Something of interest to people who are listening might not know, but Rock Chalk Sports Park is in the Perry-Lecompton School District. So you see we're right on Lawrence now, and then Topeka is to the west. But we have very good support from our elected officials, our state senators, state representatives, and we work very closely with the Lawrence Chamber of Commerce and our county commissioners. And Lecompton is a tourist site that, if it was in Texas, everybody would know about it. Well, thank you for taking the time. We always appreciate it. Any publicity is great.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end of that video. And now that you're here, let me tell you a little bit about some of the extras that we have on the channel. One of the things you can do is you can become a member. There's 3 levels. There's the supporter level, there's the producer level, and the executive producer level. And all 3 levels have different perks, and as you are more supportive financially, there's more perks. We have extra videos every week and a lot of fun stuff going on in the member section. If you haven't done so, make sure you check out travelwithawiseguy.com. We've got lots of extra stuff on there, and one of the things is merchandise. You can get you Travel with a Wise Guy t-shirt. We have Death Go Round t-shirts. We have some coffee mugs, different things that are a lot of fun, and people seem to have enjoyed. Good quality there. Also on the website, you can do things like check out the Google map. I have a pin dropped in every place I've done videos about, then a link to the video, so you can look at the map, and maybe there's somewhere where you live or somewhere you want to go. You can check out that map, and it seemed to be a very popular thing. You can sign up for my newsletter. I do that about every 3 weeks. It's totally free. And there's also all kinds of other links and tidbits in there, old videos, podcasts, just everything I could think of I throw on the website. So make sure you check out travelwithawiseguy.com. Thank you for everyone who has been supportive of this channel, and thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. And now for the reason you're probably here, the outtakes. Lecompton, Kansas. What do you think? Very colorful. It's very heavy. Spins pretty good though. Solid 8.5. Tough to get going, but once it goes, it's going to go for a while.